I just bought this 1970s Delta Unisaw for $200. And if you know anything about these saws, you know that that's either the deal of a lifetime or a rabbit hole of expensive repairs. On paper, this thing should be worth way more than that. But the top is covered in rust, the fence is out of whack, the extension table is basically garbage, the motor cover is held together with duct tape, and it barely has enough torque to pretend that it works. So today I'm finding out whether this is a legendary cabinet saw worth saving, or just 500 pounds of bad decisions. To see if any of this is even possible, I need to know what's wrong with the motor. This motor cover doesn't really give me any access, so in order to diagnose why the saw has no power, I need to remove it. Unfortunately, this is a 3-phase motor, and I don't have 3-phase power. I'll order a VFD, and while I'm waiting, I'll start planning out the other things that I want to do to fix this saw up. I'll figure out if the motor works out later. This is a full cast iron table, which in theory makes it very durable and accurate. Unfortunately, the previous owner left it outside, uncovered for months. The rust doesn't look too deep, but I won't know until I get it cleaned up. There are a lot of ways to get rid of rust, but I'll try using the cheap baking soda and vinegar method. Of course, I'll still need to use some elbow grease and maybe a Brillo pad on a drill to get it off. That's a relief. I didn't know whether this top was just rusty or permanently damaged, but now that it's all cleaned up, I can tell that it's in really good shape. There's no pitting at all. And to preserve this new finish, I'll coat the whole surface in paste wax. It's hard to show on camera, but this fence curves from front to back, and this is super dangerous and can lead to kickback. Not to mention that it's been chewed up by the blade a few times. I'll replace these fences later with some UHMW, which is a low-friction plastic that will let wood slide easily. Fortunately, I live in a very dry climate and I don't experience any rust in my shop, so I'll remove all of the old chipped paint. I don't plan to repaint these, but I will if I ever run into rust of any kind. While I'm here, I'll remove this old questionably accurate measuring tape. I'll plan to replace this later with an accurate version when I align the fence. I'll do a little basic cleaning while I plan out what I want to do for a motor cover. And this thing was pretty filthy, and there was even some mold. I know one of the reasons for this is that the motor housing didn't ramp down, which allowed dust to collect right next to the motor. I also need this new motor cover to actually give me access to the back of the motor, and hopefully I can turn one of the ugliest parts of this saw into something beautiful. So I'll cut up some leftover 5/4 cherry that I had taking up space. I designed this jig for half-blind dovetails that makes this all super easy. You can check out my video on how I make dovetails with a free 3D printed jig on my channel. The link is also in the description. I've never made a box with an angled side before, but it turns out that it's not much different than a standard box. I'll also add some rubber gasket to make sure that it's even more dust resistant. A simple rectangle mounts to the saw, and a piano hinge will allow the whole box to move out of the way. While I'm down here, the original wiring for this saw came out of this hole and not the dust port. So I've 3D printed a cover and a wire grommet to keep the wiring safe. I'll also move the dust port back to its original location with another 3D printed adapter. I want this saw to have a really nice and functional extension table. The previous version had writing all over it, which is actually a pretty good idea. So I'll make mine out of dry erase board. It's usually a pretty straightforward thing to add an extension table, but this one needs a support on the back side of the saw since this fence design doesn't require rails on the back. I had some leftover 2-inch angle iron from a previous project, and a few strategically drilled holes is all it took to make it support the extension. These threads were a little rusty, so I retapped them and had to buy some bolts for the old 3/8 24 bolt holes.
Like a glove.
I'll also use some leftover cherry to make the support. And of course I want this to be as beautiful as the motor cover, so this time I'll hand cut some large dovetails from 8/4 cherry. With the frame done, I need to inset the new dry erase surface. The easiest way to ensure that the top fits flush against the surface is to use the top as a physical spacer while making the mounting brackets. Then install is just lining it up to make sure that it's level with the cast iron. Now it has a better support so it doesn't sag, and a usable surface that I can write notes on. I also wanted to have a router table attachment on this extension to make the saw even more functional. So I'll cut that in with a router. I decided to make a template for a flush trim bit that I can remove and adjust to get the fit just right. And a jigsaw makes quick work of the remaining center section. Drop it in and it's a perfect fit. A few screw holes and it's all installed. Fence alignment is crucial to ensuring an even cut and preventing kickback. Besides, what's a legendary saw worth if it can't cut straight? Before I align it, I need to add the UHMW fence faces, and a few more screw holes here is all that's needed to mount them. I did take really careful measurements to make sure that they sit right against the tabletop. The first order of business is to ensure that the miter slots are parallel to the blade. I'll use a dial indicator to reference the slot to the same tooth on the front and back side of the blade. And luckily this blade is already very close to parallel and within acceptable tolerances for a woodworking tool. Next, I'll use the same miter slot to measure the fence. The first run is pretty out of whack as expected, so I'll use the set screws to adjust the back of the fence slightly closer to the blade. 1/4 turn at a time and then re-indicating until it runs true. And now the fence is within plus or minus 2/1000ths of an inch across the whole length of the fence, which is honestly probably just the manufacturing tolerances of the UHMW. Alright, the VFD is finally here. Let's see if all that work that I just did is going to pay off and I'll have a legendary saw, or I just wasted a bunch of time making a pretty paperweight. It's gotta be said, don't attempt any electrical work that you aren't fully comfortable with. Wiring this up for the first time was nerve-wracking since I wasn't sure if the saw would turn on. But after spending far too long crimping wires and heat shrinking, I was able to turn the saw on for the first time, and thankfully it starts up perfectly.
Yeah, you're gonna get that view in my head. Just best we can do.
I mounted the VFD to the motor cover off camera, but while I'm down here, I'll add some new belts and dry lubricant to all of the moving parts.
All right, 3 new belts. Kind of tight quarters here. All right.
I'll use my first test cut to add the measuring tape and adjust it so that way it's accurate. Now that the tape is on, I can make a cut. And it's smooth as butter. But I want to make sure that this saw cuts what it says it's going to, so I align the fence up with exactly what the saw just cut. In this case, 6 and 31/32. And now I have a fence that's dead on accurate. Here's the final results. I think it came out 1 part functional cabinet saw and 1 part shop statement piece with the dovetails and the dry erase table. I definitely think this was a steal and not a mistake, but let me know in the comments what you think. Would you refurbish a 1970s saw, or would you buy a new $4,000 cabinet saw? Anyways, thanks for watching, and until next time, get out in the shop and try something new.